Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today I'm joined by Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp as we review Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. Really, this started back on Patreon a couple months ago when myself and Nick Lograsso reviewed One from the Heart, but we are launching into a little mini Francis Ford Coppola feature series as we review multiple of his films leading up finally to talking about Megalopolis. This is a very fun series, and what a film to cover. There has been so much said about Apocalypse Now, maybe one of the most iconic films ever made, and today we break down not only what is within the film, but also its legacy as we reflect on what the film meant to Coppola then, what the film means to Coppola now, and how it's grown in the American consciousness. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the podcast. Now let's get to our review of Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now. Okay, Jack, hey, thank you so much for joining me today to continue or also start this weird blending of, myself and Nick this summer did One from the Heart. On that podcast, we were like, oh, there really is a great series to be had with Coppola's work, leading us to today where we're going to start a 3-week-long series, spread probably over the next month-ish, of reviewing some Coppola features, building up finally to the Megalopolis review. But first, Apocalypse Now. One of Coppola's biggest films, maybe his magnum opus, according, depending who you talk to. He's already made The Godfather. He's already made The Conversation. He's won the Palme d'Or. He's won Oscars. He's done the whole shebang. So he decides, let's go to Vietnam. The script, this film that was supposed to be made by George Lucas before he decided to go with Star Wars and just make that his entire identity for a while. Actually, to this day, he's not really broken that. Coppola goes out there. It's supposed to be a shorter shoot. Ends up extending to over a year. I would recommend anyone go read about the production of this film. Quite literally, I think every step of the process, anything that could go wrong with a shoot went wrong here. Finances were stolen. There was a giant hurricane. Actors showed up fat and not ready to work. They had to redo the entire editing. They bought dead body props that turned out to be dead bodies from a grave robber. They had, in post-production, they didn't even have the sounds in the sound library that they need to make this film. It felt like every single thing went wrong, to the point where then they showed the test prints. No one really likes them, but they go to Cannes still, and then it blows up. It wins the Palme d'Or, and we have Apocalypse Now. It's a one-of-a-kind film when it comes to story, legend, and myth, which also I think works with the story about this guy going into the jungle in the middle of this Vietnam War and everyone losing their minds. Very similar, it seems, to what happened behind the scenes. There's a lot of lore here, a lot of myth, a lot of identity to this film. But I'm curious, Jack, what is your history with the film? And then also, what are your thoughts? Is Apocalypse Now one of those classics that live up to expectations for you?
Well, on multiple, I think as well, forget to mention that Harvey Keitel was cast in this 2 weeks, then left. Martin Sheen had a heart attack on set, and his brother had to come in to do shots with him. And then I'm pretty sure that George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola fell out over this film. I mean, Harrison Ford turns up here. It's all crazy. Halfway through production, they change Colonel Kurtz's actual name in the film, because that's in different versions of the film as well. It's crazy stuff. But I remember first seeing this film when I was 15, 16 at college, when everyone talks about movies and film school and stuff like that. And I remember it was have you seen Apocalypse Now? Because the doors, the ends at the it plays finale of it. Have you ever seen Apocalypse Now? I was like, well, no, not really. Because I used to be, I still am, but I'm a major Scorsese fan at that time. And one of my friends, Sam, was a big Coppola fan. And I was like, oh, you should watch The Godfathers. I've never seen them. And I remember one Christmas, I remember watching the two Godfathers back to back. And that's always been a Christmas tradition since then. So I'm a big fan of Coppola. So I remember going out and buying Apocalypse Now on DVD. And in England, there's the theatrical cut and then the Redux or the redo. I don't know how you pronounce it in French. Let's say Redux, although I'm probably getting annihilated by multiple people for that. My pronunciation game is not very good. And I remember there's two different versions of it, and I think that the redo cut is maybe an hour longer. There's a big chunk of the French plantation there. I remember I've seen both versions, and I remember being sort of mesmerized by the theatrical cut. Mesmerized. And then you read into all the history that you just said earlier, which is absolutely fascinating. I mean, he shot more footage for this film than Peter Jackson shot for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. That is. I mean, he lost the use of his legs throughout production. He tried to kill himself twice. I mean, his wife was absolutely like Eleanor, God rest her soul, like how she had to deal with him during the set, and obviously knowing what he's like behind the camera, God knows what the actual production on the beach was with him, because it'd have been horrific. But it's one of those films in film folklore, where I think the hype does not do this justice. I think, and it's going to be an answer to the question later on. It's very difficult to answer the question of the week, because this is not only, I think, the definitive war movie. I think it's very much a definitive story about Hollywood, about one man's dream that bleeds into the actual narrative. I think it's the performance from Brando, how this is shot, how this is scored, how this is edited, the whole production, the whole creative process of this, I find intoxicating. If I had to show someone the definition of how to what the whole production of a film is from start to finish with legacy, this is the film. I do like Coppola's work in The Godfather 1 and 2 are outstanding pieces of in the medium. The conversation is outstanding. I think some of his 80s work is interesting. I think some of his 90s work is a bit blasé. And I think Twixt is one of his last films before Megalopolis. I don't think I've even said that right, but I think he's a really shining little star. But the 70s, he's the king. No one touches him. If it's not maybe Orson Welles in the 40s and 50s, or maybe Chaplin and Buster Keaton the years before that, Coppola is the 70s. It's unrecognizable from anyone else's perspective. It's Coppola. So Apocalypse Now has always been an outstanding feature. So we've had this chat behind the scenes, and obviously there's quite a few cuts of this film. There's quite a few versions, and I'm sure we'll get to it, because him and Lucas have multiple issues about leaving these fuckers alone. So I've seen the theatrical, I've seen the Redux, I've also seen his final cut that I think in 2019. I actually saw it at the cinema. Outstanding. The Dolby Atmos on that is generally one of the most breathtaking things to ever listen to. It's terrific. It's also post production use as well, because when I get to the other cut in a minute, there's a lot on set because of the helicopters. There's no natural sound, so all of Robert Duvall's character is all post, which I think is fascinating because it's seamless. And then a few years ago, I managed to find this work print of the film, which in film folklore is very difficult to find and view, because it's broken up, I think, to 3 sittings, and I edited it together. And it puts the story into perspective to a degree where it's genuinely fascinating that you see the theatrical cut and then this. Even the final cut, which has tweets here and there, but from seeing the work print to seeing the film that was made at Cannes, which he cut down again, to let's say that the 1979 theatrical cut is genuinely mesmerizing, because there's footage in here where it's. I mean, we were joking off air, because there's when him and Robert Duvall, they're going with Ride of the Valkyries. That there's no Ride of the Valkyries in that sequence. But it's 45 minutes long of just attacking this beach, and it's one of those things that I think for the first 10 minutes it's like, oh wow, this is amazing. Then the next 10 minutes is like, wow, this is going on forever. And then the next 20 minutes is like, this is generally quite frightening, because you are in the midst of terror. Because I think the theatrical cut does a great job about Vietnam. It's like, or even war, that it melds the interesting to entertainment to genuinely the despair. And I think it goes through the emotions. And I think, like, as all young people are, they're mesmerized by these things. And then even like a soldier's life, you sign up, you're naive, you go through boot camp, it's boring, and then you're in the shit. And I can only imagine that's the direction. It's for a lot of people, it's horrifying. And I think if any film resembles that, aside from Kubrick doing it back to front, I think this is Apocalypse Now. The work print puts it throughout there. I mean, the despair that you go with Martin Sheen's character is like in the opening when he's pissed up in the work print, you can actually see Coppola like stop him and stuff like that. Like it's and there's over little bits that have changed. So his name's changed. It's not Colonel Kurtz in the film, and the reasons are different. And also Harrison Ford's character is like in there, but talks a lot less than someone else does. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Scott Glenn, who was cut out of the theatrical cut, has a major part of the soldier who went before Martin Sheen, and he's lost his fucking mind. And they find him there, and it's and the plantation scene in France is all there, and they go to a helicopter crash, and there's like women that they're trying to save, and then they have then they have sex with them. There's a lot there in the work print, but to answer your question, like I think Lega said, this is an outstanding feature, and I think a lot of it is said about the sound design, but what Walter Murch, who's the editor here, is the saving grace here, because this is a beast, and I think it's interesting to see behind the camera and see a feature come to fruition, and to get away from the amount of issues that Apocalypse Now had, to have a rather rhythmic and ebb and flow feature that runs almost perfectly. So to its credit, I think it is a feature that should be absolutely lauded for its technical ability, but easily, I know I mention this every other week, but this should be shown in film schools. Show them the work print, and then have everyone editors. What would you get rid of? What would you get rid of here? And then compare that to the theatrical cut. I think it's genuinely so fascinating to behold. But I'm interested. So I've seen this a few times, I'll say, but I'm interested because you are the war film fan here, of course.
Yeah, no, that's the scary thing. I'm kind of dreading this episode. Number one, because I'm not a big war genre fan. I think that's probably one of the genres. Probably I don't connect with westerns more, but it's not my cup of tea, let's say. And also with Apocalypse Now, as you've mentioned and as I've mentioned, this film in the American and just the culture, I guess, legacy of cinema has been talked about to death. Like, what can you possibly add to the conversation about Apocalypse Now? So I think it's been an episode we have to do this for the series, but it's not one that I'm necessarily wasn't looking forward to. But I'll say that's not because I dislike the film, because yeah, this film fucking rules, right? Like, it is a interesting film. This is my second time seeing it. This is my first time. I just did the theatrical cut. I just did the normal theatrical cut. The first time I saw this, I did the Redux cut. It was like 8 a.m. on the 4th of July, and I was high off painkillers because I had an infection that I was dealing with. So it was like a great experience of just like tripping off these painkillers and just like in the Vietnam. It is a wildly chaotic film that just like never... It captures what I think it captures so well about Vietnam and about war in general, is just it never lets you calm down. It never lets you take a break. If you are on this boat or you get off, there's tigers. If there's something happening. Even if you go onto these camps, there's endless death. There's endless destruction. There's endless bombs. There's napalm. There's your little breaks are these sexy women coming out and dancing, which granted I'm gay, so it doesn't do much for me. But all the men are riled up. Hell yeah, get those hormones going. It is a film that just never takes a break, even in its quieter moments, whether he's sitting there in a hotel room or whether it's these quiet mornings on the boat. It still is not a calm, peaceful world that you exist in. There's also just a lot here where I think this is probably one of the best war films, and we'll get to that conversation in a little bit. It is also like, I think, a really wonderful American film. There was a lot on this watch that I saw that I was like, this is just Wizard of Oz. It's just like very, very dark, very, very violent Wizard of Oz. Especially there's a scene where he gets to where he's going and he says, this is definitely the end of the river. And it's like, oh, that's just the end of the yellow brick road. You're going to see the wizard, this mythical figure. I think there's a lot here where Coppola is having a conversation on not just Vietnam War, but on Americana in general. It's undeniably ambitious. It's undeniably chaotic. And you can see again with the production schedule and production behind this. He also had to go through 10 different actors that he reached out to. He reached out to every other actor possible at the time, and none of them would agree to make this project. People were getting sick on set. As you mentioned, he had a heart attack. It's a pretty crazy... Coppola carried a loaded gun that he'd point to his head. It's a scene that is entirely on camera, off camera chaos. He had these helicopters, and we also, I think, both watched, or at least I watched, and I know you've seen Heart of Darkness, the documentary about the film.
Yes.
And he has these helicopters that are for the military, and every day you don't know what helicopters will be there. You'll be filming a scene, and they have to turn and go away because they have to go literally fight in combat in the southern Philippines against this revolution. It is a film that there is no, it doesn't feel, and because on set there's no safety, there's no guarantee of what any day of shooting is going to look like. But in that, I think Coppola and the edit especially, and especially also the sound design, which if you also read up, when they went to Cannes overnight, they had to redo the theater's
Yes.
audio system to get it to be the correct sound system. In that chaos, what develops, and I've not seen the work print. I desperately want to see it. It will be
Yeah.
coming this week. Watch out for my Letterboxd review. In it, it's also a film that is so, I think, beautifully crafted, and it's not focused in the sense of like you're just in this linear journey. It's obviously a lot of nuance and chaos there, I guess you would say. But it never feels like it gets off track, or it never feels like it loses the plot. It's a really, really complex feature in that way, as far as control over a film, a filmmaker not having control over the film and so many elements about the film, but also then I think especially in the edit, finding that control is a really interesting narrative.
Especially from a filmmaker who, and often than not, doesn't know really when to stop. But reading the production history and looking at the work print, and I'll stop trying to talk about the work print because obviously it's not very fair. You haven't seen it, but and I'll leave a few surprises there. But the whole thing is scored by Doors music, and in the theatrical, it's only really the opening and the finale that bookend, whereas the whole film was meant to be produced by it. And it's interesting because when you look at the theatrical cut, that's mostly him and the Paramount and whoever, and I think probably more so like Walter Murch and the other people around it are trying to commercialize a product that really is not going to make any money back. And I think it's interesting to look at Coppola because he's a director who often finds difficulty or trouble with the idea of what commercialism is. And the irony with Coppola is that when he manages to balance artistic expression and his own vision and commercialism, you get magnum opuses, you get The Godfather, you get The Godfather 2. And then the issue there is that when you go for the lack of commercialism and you go from stuff like into, and again, I won't spoil anything here, but we get into other films down the line, and we just go from the idea of artistic expression. You get films like Tucker, you get films like One from the Heart, and then you get other type of ventures, and then there's like the likes of Megalopolis and stuff like that, and Twixt, where there's a difficulty to find the balance on. But he's a director that comes from the studio system, well, not necessarily the studio system, but he comes from the Roger Corman with Dementia 13 and stuff like that. But also importantly, he comes from an era where he's the film school dropout. Well, not the dropout. He's a film school with Lucas and Spielberg. Excuse me. And I think that's an interesting one because at the time of when he comes about, when he's about in his early 20s or when he gets into his 30s, I think he comes from a generation that plays within the mold of what Hollywood expects, but he's in the direct generation that's fighting against it. I think throughout all of his filmography and as well as his personality, I think one part of him has his foot firmly on the ground, and the other part of his leg wants to run. And I think sometimes what the other leg wants to jump and run off. And I think it's really interesting when he finds the balance because his creative output, I find genuinely not only very inventive, but I always find it entertaining. Like you can go read my review of Megapolis. Like there's a film that I wanted to desperately to see, and I find any form of his work, and I haven't seen all of it because I find it quite a difficult thing to see someone put their heart upon the cinema screen and me know beforehand that it's not necessarily considered a success. Obviously, you try not to go in with preconceived opinions, but it is a difficult thing. I think Coppola is one of those filmmakers who genuinely has his heart on his sleeve to the detriment. But to the point of Back onto Apocalypse Now, I think that the success with a theatrical cut is finding commercialism but yet trying to retain that utter despair of when he says, "This is my film is Vietnam." When I watch the theatrical cut, I don't really agree with that assessment. However, when you watch the work print, you will understand straight away what the man is trying to do. He is trying to drown you on screen in the excitement and the depression of when the realization of where you are, what you are, and what's happening. Because the film like very much like the Heart of Darkness. Well, the journey itself up the river, you're going to a destination. You know that you're going to have more things questioned than answered. The whole journey throughout that, which happens to Martin Sheen's character. But in the work print, it's a journey that suffocates you. It's one that for 5 hours you become, and then I mean slowly, surely, detest the idea of gunfire, helicopter blades, rotor blades, the noise. Um, you begin to, and this is I don't want anyone to read too much into this, but when you watch the film, it's quite important. You learn to hate other languages because you've got no idea what's going on. The film puts you in a position where it causes utter chaos for the viewer, and I think it puts you in the prime position of just finding venom, because when you're in the ship with him for hours and you're just going up screen and you go to this character and this house, you get to the French plantation and you have no idea what's going on. I think very much like Willard, like the character itself, you become somewhat desperate, agitated, and ultimately isolated. And then slowly but surely, it begins as one less person on the boat. Then there's another less person, and then the voices stop that you understand, and more voices when you get to the certain finale or the last act, which goes on for like 2 hours in the work print. No one speaks, and that yet you're with an American, Dennis Hopper, who is even more crazy in the work print, and then someone else who you think is going to be able to help Willard. And I'm not talking about Colonel Kurt, someone else, which I don't want to spoil it for anyone out there, but you can go read about it. Does not want to speak, does not want to talk about their journey. And what happens slowly but surely? The same thing happens to Willard, and it swallows the voice. And it's interesting that the whole sentimentality of that, or the whole expression of that, is that when these people came back, they don't want to talk about Vietnam because it's a dark, dreary, depressing, and ultimately venomous place where the youth was taken away from them. And not only that, but seeing things and fragging and all sorts of stuff, and a different type of warfare that no one was prepared. The American culture wasn't prepared for. I mean, when they came back from the boats of World War Two, look at the reception in New York, the famous Times Square photograph. Never happened in Vietnam. They were throwing helicopters and off the ships coming back from the Philippines in the water. No. Do you know the boat that they go in, Carson? Not
What
one of
about
them.
it?
Not I think it's a PBT or something, or PBD or the PBT boat. Not one of them survived the Vietnam War. They destroyed every one of them, and purely because they didn't want the enemy to have them. Like the whole conversation about communism and stuff like that. The whole thing within the film is suffocating, and it's one of the films where you begin, like, you go in with the, like, when the Rolling Stones are playing, and like that, or the Doors, and you become to detest the acknowledgement of when those sounds happen. The very things that you start with this film and energy ultimately get drained so much you become to resent them. And the work print does a fabulous job. I mean, granted, it's 5 hours, but there's no commercialism with this film whatsoever. You can't just, I mean, you could probably show it in some art house theaters and split it up part one, part two, but you'd kill the whole idea of it. So the work print in itself is a fabulous concoction of the idea of what he's trying to achieve, and it works perfectly. But then the problem you have is that you can't show that to screens, and you can't show that in an order to find commercialism. So the way that he finds, and again, it's not just a Coppola, it's the whole team. And they would have had to have genuinely tied him to a chair and be like, this needs to go, this needs to go, this needs to go. It probably would have killed him, but the right decisions were made in order to be able to sell a product that still retains that energy, that fight, that does that despair. Like when he says at the when he says it at the Vietnam presser, my film's not about Vietnam. My film is Vietnam. It'll only really make sense if anyone watches the work print. And I'm not trying to gatekeep anyone there. If anyone follows me on Twitter or follows on Letterboxd, if you want to watch the work print, just message me on there or leave a comment. I've done it before with the Beetlejuice work print. If anyone wants to watch these things, just I'm not. There's no point gatekeeping. I'd love people to see this. I'd love more people to see this sort of stuff. But it'd be fascinating to know your opinion, because I quite like the artistic, the weight of those type of features, but it's one of those things where I will never watch the work print again. because I sound like so melodramatic here, and I probably should be on a fucking award show, but I find that it generally takes a piece out of you, and I can only imagine if it's watching it for 5 hours and not living for it for 15 months. I can imagine that there's a lot that was left in the Philippines or on the cutting room floor for Coppola, where I think that after the success of the 70s, what else do? You go bigger. And I think he chose a project that probably questioned him a lot and took him to the brink. And I don't think a lot of him came back. And I think if you look at his filmography throughout, he never retains that energy, the dazzlement. He gets into financial trouble. It very much is a playing with the devil and coming up cards. I don't think he. I think he definitely went in with a lot more expectation of what he could achieve and came out with like, well, you might think you're this dazzling filmmaker, but this is a bigger story than you ever think it is. And I think he does a really good job of honouring the Vietnam War. I don't think it's one of those films where it's like when you watch it and you're like, get some. Like, it's not anything like that. It's not like it doesn't do anything about romanticizing anything there. I think if you were going to show a young kid not to go into a war, you would show them this, and you would hope that, knowing that when Willard gets back on that boat, or if he gets back on that boat, because there's a little bit towards the work print there that's interesting enough, you know. I mean, the work print ends. I don't want to ruin it for you, but the work print does not end like the theatrical cut does. No, it does the redux, or the final cut. It's not a black screen. You sit there and you watch things happen. And I'm not talking about the buffalo getting chopped up, which we'll get into as well, because I think that's actually horrendous. I can't watch that a bit. I have to fast forward. I think it's disgusting. But I appreciate not even appreciate. I understand the commitment to the bit, but wildly unneeded. But he makes you sit with something during the film, and in the opening, he rhymes them. In the opening, it's a moment of awe, power, of showing that America can play God. But in the finale, he shows that the other way around of, well, we're only human beings, and when people play God and people play with fire, people get burnt. And that's not just about the napalm expression, but it is quite a grisly and uncomfortable finale. And I think, again, just to wrap up my gambit there, it's a perfect concoction of just totally encompassing terror. And if it's a film that genuinely installs utter. I don't know about you. Would you call this sadistic? Is it nihilistic? It's a tough watch, and I think it has to be. It has to be.
I would say sadistic. I don't know if I don't know if I would say nihilistic per se. It's definitely a sadistic feature. Like, it definitely is. But also, again, for what you're capturing, not just with Vietnam, but I think this expression of humanity, I think it has to be brutal in that sense. I am curious because you mentioned, I've not seen the work print, the ending and how it's talking about being God. There's also a line, at least in the theatrical cut, and I'm sure all the cuts early on, where they're talking about how there's that temptation when you're out in the forest and you have that control and you have that power and you have these resources. It's a temptation for man to play God. I think one of the biggest things why we're covering this film on Coppola's career is this is one of the first times he takes a big gamble on himself. He's financing a lot of this film based off The Godfather. He wagers his car, his house, The Godfather's earnings to finish this film and make it done. This one pays off. He'll immediately turn around and do the same thing with One from the Heart and fail, and then have, as you mentioned, a career full of financial failures. Even if you look at this week, he just had to sell a private island because Megalopolis failed. Like, it's a common trope for him. Do you think that there's also, though, a degree of him talking about himself and filmmaking in that statement? Because also, like, he's out there in Vietnam with control, or not in Vietnam, with Philippines, with control over these resources, with controls over these bodies, with the ability to write a script. I mean, when you are a filmmaker, you are also expressing and playing God, in a sense. And I think this is a filmmaking experience. I agree with you that probably took a tremendous chunk out of him, but I also think it fed into ego. I think it fed into this belief that he can go and do the impossible and walk out of the jungle with this hit, with this successful film. again, I think that is a mindset that will bite him in the butt really, really quick with One from the
Yeah.
Heart. But do you see that as being also a personal reflection at all?
I don't think consciously going into it, no. But I think the irony is that yes. And I think the interesting aspect of it is that when you look at his friends in the 70s, I think 2 years earlier than this, with Star Wars, George Lucas rewrites science fiction. It's utterly done. Star Wars, even now, and we're both major fans of the franchise, as anyone wants to attest to. It's absolutely just taken over. It changed cinema, and for good and for bad, it changed cinema. His other friend Spielberg redefines what you call commercial horror in Jaws, and crafts the box office hit blueprint in order for Star Wars to be achieved, and then goes off and makes Close Encounters. Then a few years later, we'll start making Indiana Jones again, a franchise piece. Before both of these films take off, um, Coppola makes a commercial hit of the Italian Gangster that was a B movie put into an A movie. Now, when you compare all three of them, yes, I think you look at Coppola's the least effective compared to the box office hits that set the precedent. But it's no easy task to, if you ever watch The Offer, which is a Paramount production where Dan Fogel plays Coppola, and they have the making of The Godfather. Highly recommend it. Matthew Good plays the fabulous Robert Evans to a T. It's fascinating to watch. Also, go read Robert Evans' book about Coppola, about making the Cotton Club, because them two love and hate each other. It's fascinating, but we'll get there. We'll get there in a different day, I'm sure. But I think when you look at what Coppola did with The Godfather, is that he put something into the mainstream and he made it commercial, and it was a hit. But I don't think you can necessarily redefine cinema, because it was bound to happen depending on the popularity of the subject. For example, Freaking did it with The Exorcist, and I think when you look, because we've had this chat before again about the box office, uh, and we looked at what did we look at, the summer blockbuster, didn't we? The blockbuster series, and we had this chat. So I'm not going to go over all ground here, but just to reaffirm the point, the stance, I think Freakin did more with The Exorcist commercialising horror than I think Coppola did with the gangster movie. Granted, I think both of them are on the same trajectory, and I think both filmmakers are somewhat similar. But I think even with the success of The Godfather, and then outdoing that with The Godfather Part Two, and those are major successes. Don't get me wrong. I still think Coppola is somewhat hindered by not having that commercial success. And then in between the production of those two films, he makes The Conversation, and it's like, right, like this is the guy now. But he hasn't had that commercial outstanding feature that redefines the genre. And I think he goes into Apocalypse Now thinking that my shit don't stink. I know what I am. I know how I'm built. I've made two of these films. Everyone's backed against me, and everyone's bet against me. Everyone's betting against me now, and I know I'm going to go in here. And I think he takes in a lot of ego. And to his credit, I don't think this film would get made without that ego. So it's a positive and a negative. Ego's always catch-22. Is it character or is it ego? Well, it depends on the person. And I think that the irony is that that playing God, and then all these things happen to him. I think that's the irony of the point about it happening in production. But the one thing I wanted to mention about that, which I find quite interesting, is that that point you made about trying to play God and things falling apart and trying to control a filmmaker, trying to go above and beyond. Then he's trying to control the weather, a small army, your actors and stuff like that. He gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and I don't know how you can generally control that as a one person who's put his own money into it, and things are just succumbing here left and right and centre. But the one thing that no one's really ever, I mean, it's quite obvious, and don't get me wrong, I think people have spoke about this. But one thing I've always thought to be genuinely quite horrifying about this film is that the context of Apocalypse Now is about people playing God and how far they can take things, and about soldiers taking over using violence, war. It's about the U.S. Army playing God, and about pawns in this story. And the devil exists, but nobody knows where he is or who he is. But they think the devil exists as communism, but they're on God's side and they're playing God. But the fascinating thing about this film is that when Willard gets to that camp towards the end of the film, he sees the devil, he meets him, he talks to him, and the devil looks just like him. And I think there's a realization there that what Coppola's obviously quite clearly trying to suggest is that you might be you might well thinking you're playing God and you're acting in God's best interest, but in reality you might actually be the devil, and the story just totally changes. And I think that then descend into genuine madness about that we deserve this. We deserve this. Like whatever happens to him now in that camp, if he gets blown up or gets killed by whoever, we deserve this. And I think his descent into madness there is not necessarily like a psychological thing. I think it's an acceptance into knowing that, of ample opportunities had that to leave Vietnam, he chooses to take this mission on. I think he knows that he's going to go. He wants that next thing. He wants to meet his maker, and I think he wants to do it on a figurative sense. And that when he meets a guy who's incredibly intelligent, but then has chosen to do the things he's chosen, and then decided to annex itself from the U.S. invasion and the U.S. side, and to do what he's done. Like he meets the devil, and it looks just like him. It's the same human being. He's got 5 fingers on each hand, and he's a colonel, and it's just like I think there's something quite interesting there that you go to the brink and you think. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that again I think the Coppola thing's quite obvious. I'm not trying to pick stuff from my arse here, but I've always found that to be quite not awe-inspiring but defining. That you go on this journey to the brink of insanity. You are pushed to see this utter evil. Throughout the film, we're given slight shots of what he looks like, but we're always described of what he's done. We read part of his briefings, and we read stuff what he's done, and we go all this way to kill one man. All this money, all this time. I mean, people die along the way, whose families, whose generational things just stop. Like young kids, Vietnamese people, Vietnamese innocents, Vietnamese soldiers are decimated for one little boat to go to the point of this river to find one man who you think is going to be this just like terrorizing hulk of a devil, and it's just a man that's just like, I'm not doing this anymore. What we're doing is wrong. The whole thing is horrifying beyond belief, and has just given up. And I think he's hit his point where he's accepted his fate, and then it's just that recurring thing. It's just an interesting parallel. And if you want to allude that to Coppola, then I think it's definitely there. But I don't think it's a conscious thing. I think it just happens throughout the longevity of the film, because it just generally kills him. I think he went as far as he could. And this is all like the romanticization of the film as well, Carson. Don't get me wrong, but I think he goes that far, Coppola, to see this, how far he can go to make this film. And I think he realizes at the end of the day that like he sacrificed everything, his family, perhaps his career, his finances, generational wealth, all to look in the mirror, and the person who's caused all these problems is his own reflection. That must be tough. It must be tough. It must be you must have, you either take that on, and somehow, I don't know how, you must take that on board, or you crumble. And I think both of them are earnest options, and I think both of them are understandable options. I don't know how you can take that on, but somehow he did, and it's made. I mean, whatever kills you, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think Apocalypse Now is probably a detriment to that saying, because I think people come out of this with huge chunks missing, if it's figuratively, literally, and I also think if it's contextually or subtextually and on a literal level, yeah.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of power and nuance in that conversation about the devil and this journey. We know that the guy who went on this journey beforehand, who did the same river, who went up the same path to find this guy, we know he lost his mind during it. Not only is the reflection of the devil in this final man. Just a man, just a human, but he belongs to this military. He was one of the top, has the best resume. He did everything. He was the model citizen for who you would want in that position or in that military. There's a lot of horror there to be found in that reflection. That is super, super unnerving, I guess is what I'll say. It really feels like no one is safe, I guess you could say, in a way where it's like, I'm trying to think. There's like some film I'm thinking of that it's on the tip of my tongue that I'm just not going to remember at this moment. But it really feels like nobody is safe from that losing of the mind, from that craziness, from the devil's influence, I guess you could say. It is absolutely horrifying. I also think it is important to recognize, like, this film, while I think it's really quick and easy to romanticize it, and it's really quick to celebrate it, and to have the conversation we're having right now about it. It is one that not only just took a chunk out of like these people's lives, but like people died making this. Not only did the water buffalo tragically die in like this horrific sense. That I feel like we've recently talked a lot about animal deaths on the show. It's definitely hard to watch for sure. I see why you would skip it. Just seeing an animal just get slaughtered like that. But there were people who died making this, and I guess when you play as God, like it's hard to talk about because you have the narrative here about playing God. You have our romanticism of Coppola and his journey but then you also have like the legitimate responsibility of being on set, of protecting those on set, of organizing a set. And I think it's hard with a project like this because it's really easy to sit here and be like, oh my God, it's so cool how crazy it was, and to celebrate that craziness, and oh my God, they don't make films like this anymore. But there is real life consequence to that when you play with God, when you play with these big objects of destruction, when you just have it be chaos and you're pushing against the elements and the weather. It's a fine line where that reality really comes into play in a way that like is super uncomfortable, to be honest. And I mean, obviously during this time, there's a lot of conversations. The Twilight Zone movie is obviously probably the most infamous example of it. It's not like this movie was far off, I think, in a lot of ways from probably having a very different narrative around it. And I think that in some ways that enhances the film and the conversation it has, but also you get into this conversation of like art and what is the worth of art, and is it worth that loss? I don't know. It's a difficult conversation. It's a difficult film, I think, to digest because of that, because you have to understand that craziness. You have to celebrate that if you're going to celebrate the film, but it also has that toll. It's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, Coppola's on record to say that it was a part of the tribesmen honouring them or honouring something. And yes, and I suppose the irony of including that scene is that I would fast forward that, but I would have no problem watching other things in the film. I think that probably says more about me as being desensitized to certain things within the genre as well, and him also proving the point that about the Vietnam is that what happens in the film, you can ultimately how far you can take the imagery, how far you can go, and that's my cut-off point. But him as a filmmaker would probably turn around and say that, like, I think I've succeeded, and yeah, I think he has. But the irony of that is that because it's a genuine animal death as well. That's what makes me uncomfortable. If it was simulated, then I would find it uneasy, but I wouldn't find it to be utterly shocking that this is. So I think there's a little bit here and nor there with it. However, I think let's just say, for argument's sake, that it's a simulated death, right? I know it's not, but let's just say it is. That I think people would turn off on that, and he would be like, "You can't even get to the end of the river. That's what's turned you off." These characters here have gone through all of this and gone to the utter brink. They've gone the step next above that, and then are left to live with those choices. We can we can turn the film off. We can forget about it. Those characters within this concept are taken to the utter brink and then have to question things, or ultimately don't. That's it. And depending on which version of the film you see, there's choices there. There's an aloof nature to the theatrical cut. There's more definitive nature to the work print. Each both sort of terrifying in their own own different interpretations. However, I think it's interesting the water buffalo. The work print's slightly different. I think the work print has another uncomfortable moment in it as well. Um, but yeah, it's a thing where it's like. Also, it feels like a 1970s thing for me. Let's do something crazy. Let's do, and then like 1980s, like let's put something in to make it really uncomfortable and sell it. I think that he gets away with it because it's like honouring, and it was going to be slaughtered anyway, so we filmed it. Like okay, like yeah, and I think within the context of the film, does it work? Yeah, is it still murky and very uncomfortable for me as a person to watch? Undoubtedly. Um, yeah. I'll tell you one thing as well is that we mentioned earlier when we were speaking about casting, and when you watch this film, I can't see anyone but Martin Sheen be in this film because I can. Harvey Keitel is like just too on the nose. There's just no. I can't see how that. He's a terrific actor, Harvey Keitel. A terrific actor, but I don't see him as that thing that type of character actor that can be molded. I think what you get is Harvey Keitel, and there's not a detriment to that, but that's Harvey Keitel. And yet with Martin Sheen, I think he's fabulous. I think I think he plays someone who is carrying a serious amount of fucking baggage with him, and is just tired. And I think he conveys mental exhaustion through external, genuinely out to a degree where it's outstanding. He's always like a yard too slow. He's the fittest one there, the smallest one. He's a yard too slow. Like how he gives his monologues and his voice. It's always like duh duh duh. It's always like there's this monotonous version to it, like he's been beaten into institutionalized program for war, and yet his mind and his body have just not really caught up. And I think his mind's just slowly at that point just dissipated into the ether. He's terrific. I think Brando. Everyone else is sort of just writing on the wall. I think you've got a few other like the young Larry Fishburne as well, Casper. You know, there's other things as well, and Robert Duvall's like a bit of a scene stealer, and he probably takes most of the mantle of being able to be that character. Like, oh, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, but the one here is Brando, and Brando is like obviously does not want to be there. Has turned up late, turned up massively overweight, and in the work print you can tell that boy's big. Yet in the theatrical, it's done in a certain way where it's all hidden with shadow, and I think that's a perfect example of Coppola. Restriction makes him be a far better filmmaker because he has to think. Yet in these productions that follow, he goes too big, and Megalopolis is another one where it should have been made in the mid 2000s or 90s without the massive use of CGI and just and the creativity spark like Twixt. Twixt is so creative yet minimalistic, where the other things get too big. And I love Megalopolis, don't get me wrong, but it's a feature that would have been provided to be far more exquisite, knowing a lot more of it was practical. For example, when Adam Driver and I can never remember her name.
Plaza
No, not
or
her. When they're walking on the clouds,
oh.
like that's practical. It looks outstanding. It's a physical set. Looks terrific. The other stuff, it's like oh, it's aged and it's aged moment of and there's nothing wrong with that. But he's a very good director when he's working with like physical realization. But back to my point, I think Brando is skewed on screen like Lon Chaney, like the Universal monsters. There's an earthiness to it, and it's the water over the head, the shaved head, the grumble of the voice. It's like and Willard's like he's just like white, pale, emancipated, eyes are bloodshot. He's got nothing left. He's there to see this huge devil, and the man is someone he actually looks up towards, something that he could have been, far more disciplined, and yet sees him, and the words he says are both cutting yet informative, and have this wonderful balance of being horrifying yet honest. And he says he's going to cut off Dennis Hopper's head if you take another photograph of me. It's a man with all the power in the village and knows full well that he gives people a second chance. Like there's an interesting horrifying element of control there, but yet he gives you the chance. It's you who fucks up. Therefore, he allows Willard to stay. Willard knows that he can't if he continues and goes through with what he's meant to be doing. He knows that things are going to turn, and it's an interesting one. But the whole thing with Brando is that he plays it just like a Universal monster movie villain, and I love that. I think it's one of the best performances put to screen ever. It's fascinating. I love the photography. I'd love this to be shot in black and white. Oh my god! If this was just like 35mm or 65mm monochrome image, was oh my god! Like it would have been intoxicating to watch. But the color with the greener with the jungle, regardless, it works. But I think it's terrific. But Brando is outstanding here. I think the performances from them two are terrific. Probably the beginning of the end for Brando, if not Superman. Was it 2 years later in 81? Is it so or
I believe
19?
so, yeah.
Yeah, so it's probably the beginning of the end for Brando as well. But Sheen is like just fabulous here as well.
No, I completely agree, especially Brando. I mean, and especially I am so curious what the original vision for that character and for that scene was, because obviously it went through a lot of changes, as you mentioned. But as is, it's flawless. I mean, it's as close to flawless, and I think that Universal Monsters comparison genuinely is. I've never thought of it in that way, but how they use his image and how they use his presence, like spot on.
Well, the work print's interesting because it's monologue after monologue after monologue in the work print, and I think you can tell that he's just shooting to cut it down to those pieces of genius. And the only thing about that is that you become invasive to the process because you don't see the snippets. You think the snippets are gold, but really behind the scenes, you've got an actor working for like 2 hours, just talking, and obviously Coppola then strips that down into theatrical cut. So but it's still fascinating to see like it's almost like watching Lon Chaney put on the prosthetics before the film, and it's like this is amazing, and then he's doing his lines while he's doing it. It's like you're watching him work, but it's like everything that he's saying is not just it's not just something like we're going to go through a rehearsal. It's like this is actually in the final cut, and to say he just turned up, was reading the screenplay with pages just plucked out and posted on side of the wall. It just shows the power of the ability that he had as an actor, and I'm not saying that's a positive either because I think it's slightly unprofessional, but it just showcases the caliber of creativity that he had. But he's very much more verbal in the work print. He walks around with Willard, like they have a big chat and stuff like that. So it's a lot more open and honest. Yeah.
I'm excited to see this work, Brent. if there's one narrative of this episode, I will have to check in next time we talk Coppola on here. I guess I'll have to give here's my quick thoughts on it. But yeah, I'm excited. I would definitely recommend, I guess, anyone listening who wants to check it out, I guess DM Jack, reach out to him, get that copy, check out Good Cinema, and some of these alternative cuts, even like if it's a open matte version or just other versions, whatever it is, typically pretty worthwhile. I will still say, I think the Jurassic Park open matte version is like my favorite film of all time. Specifically that version, it's gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, kind of maybe slowly getting to the conclusion here on Apocalypse Now. Yeah, I mean, I think everything we've said about it, like, what else can you say? I think it's a film that you have to, number one, understand its impact and understand its process, and it creates a lore for itself within that. But I think one thing we did today is really kind of beautifully show, like, I think sometimes with films like Apocalypse Now, its legend and its identity as a film in that sense can sometimes overtake the conversation, but there really is like a lot here. There's a lot, not just reflection on Vietnam War and the chaos of Vietnam War. That line, "This is not about Vietnam, it is Vietnam," is such an iconic line. But there's a lot about film. There's a lot about Coppola. There's a lot about in these months of just letting it. Let me wait until a police car passes.
That's because you're talking about work prints. You're not loud work prints.
Yeah,
it's
stop.
good to see it.
I'm kidding.
Studio Canal. They are literally coming for your car, so you best run now.
Okay. Boy, I even forgot where I was and what I was saying. I think what we proved, I think today, and we had this conversation with some good detail. There's a lot here about Coppola letting this project, sit for all these months, all these delays, all these edits and adjustments and changes. I think Coppola ultimately, largely, kind of, even if it's subconscious, goes inward with a lot of these conversations. And I think it's a very worthy film, and I think a good start. Again, this really is our first crack at Coppola, and I think the story of ego and the story of ambition and size and scale, and also a story of control. Here, as I mentioned earlier, it's a fascinating look at the lack of control and then regaining that control. He immediately turns around into One from the Heart, which he literally decides, like, screw going to the jungle. I'm just going to put on a soundstage where I can control every single element however I want. That bomb. So we've already talked about that again on Patreon. And we will see that narrative control continue to play into Megalopolis. It'll continue to play into the rest of his career. So very worthwhile. Jack, do you have any last thoughts on?
You've got to keep all this in. Don't. I've got.
It's horrible. It's wild.
The one thing I did want to mention, just very briefly before we end, is that we're seeing now filmmakers being able to go back to the source and looking at their own features that they're not happy with, and there's been a long established conversation and an open dialogue about, once the film's finished, leave it. That's the reason it was done then, and going back and making director's cuts and alternate cuts and stuff like that is always very interesting. But there's only two or three films where are constantly, and I mean constantly, touched up. The first one I would say is Metropolis by Fritz Lang, like the Giorgio Moroder version with like Queen on it, and then a black and white cut, then a one in color. Obviously, that being quite a definitive feature within the science fiction genre. Another one is obviously Star Wars. I think another one is slowly but surely is probably going to be Peter Jackson with the Lord of the Rings, because the 4K versions are dire. But even then, I wouldn't necessarily put much stock into that. So you've got Lucas and Star Wars. The other one is this. Now he's released 3 cuts of this into the formal in the formal Desire, and he just and I mentioned this is funny, this, because in 2019 when I went to go see the final cut, and the review's actually on Clapper, and I think I mentioned this either in my Letterboxd review or in the Clapper review, because one of the very first reviews I did for the site, and I mentioned, like, it feels interesting that this is coming out now, because the second round of opening of Megapolis was bringing, like, oh, I want to make this science fiction movie, I want this in it, and he was making rounds about it, and the film just from Studio Canal happened to release as a final cut. Um, and I think it's interesting that there's a very interesting formal lineage between Apocalypse Now, ironically, and Megapolis in getting in the 6 years getting back into production. Nevertheless, it's a feature that he's never been able to put down and accept. And I think I can imagine, for reasons, again, not to take answers from you, but I think it's interesting that when I look at it, I can understand why you go there with one idea and you come out with 19, and the film's dictating its own pace, you're not in control of it, and once you lose that, it's difficult to then set the precedent, because it's taking shapes all over, and to get that back and reshape into one formal thing is almost impossible, if not utterly impossible. So I can understand that, but I wonder if, not to. I hope it's not like a simple answer for you. So please, if it is, don't worry about it. But I'm genuinely interested in you. Why can he not leave this alone then? Why not just release the work print in the 90s, then upload it to Blu-ray and 4K? Why keep on reassessing the theatrical cuts of these movies and not just the work print? Why the necessity to go back to Apocalypse Now? Because he never touched the Godfathers. He wouldn't. I mean, the Paramount
He touched
re-edited.
number 3, didn't he?
Yes, yeah. Oh, you've got me there, you bastard. Yeah, you've got me. He did change the color grading, because he restored it personally, and I've got air quotes in my bedroom as I do that. Um, he restored it to a point where he actually darkened some images, but the Coppola Zoetrope and Paramount restored those images of the first two, but then he did go back to The Godfather Part 3. I put my hand up. Yes, the Death of Michael Corleone, the Coda, which I think is actually an improvement. Although I do like that film for its own individual idiosyncratic nature to it. But that's another day. That's another day because I do really like the film. Um, but it's the one primarily where he's just like dipped in, dipped in, dipped in, and I'm fascinated to know your opinion of why. Why not just leave this alone after the two cuts originally in '79, then in the '90s? Why do you feel he has this fascination to keep on assessing this? Because it has its legacy. It's not like people are going to rediscover this. It's like it has a fully fledged, like undefinable legacy. So I'm just fascinated to your opinion.
I mean, it's probably what out of all of his features, number 2 or number 3 as far as the one probably with the biggest legacy behind. Definitely The Godfather, potentially Godfather Part 2. And it's not like he hasn't had other editions of other films like The Cotton Club, for example. But you're right,
Yeah,
this is the one that he keeps coming back to, though. It's not just like a one and done. He keeps reevaluating. He keeps reanalyzing. I don't have a necessarily a perfect answer for this. Obviously, we'd have to ask Coppola. And I think unlike something like Star Wars, where you can look at Lucas's involvement and just say, okay, well, he wants more of these visual effects. You can kind of identify exactly what he wants out of it. Coppola, I don't know. I think he definitely, obviously, had as we've mentioned, very troubled time making this. I don't know if he ever felt, I mean, even on release, what he won the Palme d'Or for was a work print, unfinished version of the film. I don't know if he's ever really seemingly probably put together the statement he wants to make. I also think you can't, though, underestimate, like, when this released in what, 79, it was what, 3 years, 4 years after the end of the Vietnam War. That's a very personal, relevant statement for society at the time. As society has evolved, not just with the Vietnam War being put in the past, but you have other wars, other conflicts, other changes in society. Coppola is a very political filmmaker. We will certainly get there with Megalopolis, if nothing else. I wonder if he's seen different elements or different parts of the film that he's wanted to enhance and that he's wanted to maybe enlighten, to revise the statement, I guess, maybe to reflect something more directly. It's also hard because I've not seen the final cut, so I don't even know really what he changes in the newest one from 2019. But those would be my probable guesses. But again, like when you have a statement like this, where you have months and months and months of edits and changes and forcing your hand to change certain things, and you're rewriting right there in the jungle, I can get the sense of probably not being happy with that final version and still feeling like there's a perfect cut somewhere in here and just not being able to find it. Yeah, I don't know, though. Do you have any theories? Because you've seen the 2019 version specifically.
yeah. The 2019 version
What
is
do you
just a
get?
it's just a refined edit of the Redux version, with a little bit here and there. There's one word you used in that really great response, enhanced. And if you read about Coppola, he had this thing for a long time where he wanted to redefine the nature of what editing could be. And I think the edit in his whole filmography has been a staple of issues. If it's recutting Godfather Part 3, recutting this for the 95th time, director's cut of The Outsiders, director's cut from One from the Heart, director's cut of The Cotton Club, encore editions, so on and so forth. He's had an issue about what is the nature of finality within image and within and sound, and ultimately of cinema, a finality of the final product, that it shouldn't just go and necessarily die off release and then it's there, it can't live, it's sort of in purgatory. And he had this fascination for a long time, and he actually wrote a book about it. So I recommend anyone to go read it. I'm going to try and read it next year. But the crux of the nature is that he wanted to try and edit a film in real time and craft it like an opera. I believe that's the idea, but the the logistics of that on paper sound fascinating and genuinely quite inspiring. But I just think the logistics of it don't quite work. And I think he tried for a numerous age. I think it came back around in like 2011. He was going to do it, and it just didn't work out. But it would have been fascinating to know if two editors working side by side. But I know it doesn't working and crafting image and sound pieces together, and then having it on like a 10-minute pause or like a 10-minute delay, and the actual film coming together in front of you. I think it's a fascinating exploit. I don't know how far he got with it, but I think he's always had trouble with what's next. And Megalopolis does a brilliant job. And we'll bring, ironically, they're probably, I tell you what, I'll try read the book by the time we get on to that episode, if you give me a few weeks. Because I think that Megalopolis directly contributes to that look about how to try and stop things, unravel and create cinema and create moments and have it in real time, but also being crafted. Creating your own way of form. Let's say I'm not going to all these sort of like fucking highly academic terminology and stuff like that, but I think he's always just had a massive trouble about the editorial stance on features, and I think his issue with finality, like George Lucas's, is that. As he grows older, he's getting better, but yet he's just not got the technology and the stat. If I had it back then, I had it back then, and I think it's the issue of the old wise king and stuff like that, where your time's done and it's done. To go back and to try relive the era of the past with the modern day things, you contradict what it was like back then of a purity, if it's so to speak. Do you know what I mean? Like people making an AI version of James Dean or an AI version of, let's say, uh, Boris Karloff or Bela Lugosi or even Lon Chaney to realize more films that were never created. On the surface is fascinating, but there's a reason why that legacy stands tall or stands so interesting, is because that era was never fulfilled. It was never, it never came to fruition. So the fact that James Dean made 3 films that's his legacy. That's why it's so engaging to watch what he could have done. The magnitude of that career is all going to be conversation because we have 3 installments of how good it was. To then make a 4th film with AI, I think you take away that mystique and the work. And I think Coppola's breaching on wanting to, have a bark. Have a dog and bark himself. And I find that's this is terrible to say, but I also think that's an issue of age. And I think Scorsese has dealt with it really well. In that Scorsese will never make the films he wants to make, all of them at his age. He's 86 or 87, I believe. It's just not going to happen. So he has to choose wisely, but he'll never fulfill what he wants to make because time's gone. And I think Coppola has not succumbed to that acknowledgement of morality yet, because his work is immortal, but I think he's not done, and I think that's really difficult for an artist, because who's to tell him he's done? Us as an audience. I showed up for a film. I showed up for his film. Does his behaviour acknowledge that? Does his artistic merit acknowledge that? Does the financial commercial success acknowledge that? Who is to tell him when he's done? And I think to fulfill those dreams it has in his mind, I think he's really found it difficult. And I think the fact that, again, you've said about Apocalypse Now, teetering and then having to go back and make The Godfather 3, you could argue he ruined the first 2 films. I'm not a proponent of that, but that's an argument. Does he feel the same? I think so. I think he hates that film. I think he hates the film because he did it for financial reasons. I think he hates a few features he had to make and then gone back and re-edited them. But you can't keep on doing that. What it is. Cinema's finality, to a certain degree, it captures youth. It captures the exuberance of work at one time and evolution of it. They are staples of time caught that can be rewound and watched, like legacy in the making. But it's fascinating to watch a film now and then in 20 years' time, what's happened around that film, the exploits of it, impact 20 years' time, like the things that are happening now, are going to be totally different to view certain other things, actors, directors, to find out years and years what happened later. So I just think he's just something that can. I know that's a really long-winded answer. I apologize, but I think it's just something where he's failed to accept finality and acceptance of these things are one and done, and he's left a major legacy. Gia, Sophia, like there's the long that he's left a brilliant longevity with filmmakers who are going to carry the name. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too melancholy about it, but that's how I ultimately see it. But it'll be fascinating to watch these films and see, and that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that I've got going ultimately
Well,
come to fruition.
I will say before we get to Megalopolis, you do also have to watch Megadoc. That was a crucial catalyst in this conversation and understanding the mind of
Yeah.
Coppola. So you do have to watch that. Interested in the book, I might also try to read it before we get there. And then also watch, if you've not already, which I don't think you have, watch One from the Heart before the end of this. That's the homework requirements. And for you and everyone at home, go check out these films, because I think this is going to be to be honest, I think it's going to be a deeply depressing series. I don't think this is one that's going to be very uplifting. Sorry. I don't know why we always do these sad, even some are blockbusters. Was like, wow, cinema's dead. We'll see where this goes. But Apocalypse Now, at least, hey, Coppola right now, where we're leaving Coppola today, off on a major high, this very, very complex film. It's hard to just say like universally a great film, because it is great, but it also carries that baggage. But I think we did a good job kind of analyzing that legacy and discussing it today. Let's close the chapter on the war, on Apocalypse Now for now, and let's get to our question of the week. We'll see if we come back to Apocalypse Now with this question. What is our favorite war film? Jack, I'll turn it over to you first. What are your favorite films from the war genre?
Paths of Glory is outstanding. Casualties of War, Brian De Palma's like underrated, genuinely like devastating feature about the other side of the Vietnam War. Full Metal Jacket, Kubrick, Coppola's Apocalypse Now, outstanding. I think 1917 by Sam Mendes is quite good. If I'm going to throw an absolute fucking curveball at these people, Cass, at these fans of cinema, there's a South Korean. I'm sure it's South Korean. It might be Japanese, but it's an Asian war film called Brotherhood about two brothers who I'm sure it's South Korean who have to sign up for the war, and they're two innocent brothers, and they get separated and they go fight the war. One brother doesn't know if the other one's dead, and they ultimately find each other on the battlefield towards the end, and it's devastating. It's a really good war film. Another one is Dong Magol. I think it might be a Japanese war film about these pilots who crash into a rice paddy field in the Korean War, and like taken in by these quite kooky South Korean, or maybe I can't remember if it's Japanese, but they get to like there's like very kooky village people, and they find the morality, they find empathy, and it's very much like The Grave of the Fireflies type of ending. It's fucking brutal. I'm doing my Asian films of the week, war films of the week, and the subtitle film. So those are my two: Dong Mak-gol and Brotherhood. Watch those two. But the ultimate one is it's Apocalypse Now. It has to be. There's no. I'd be fascinated to know. You're probably gonna bring one out here and be like, oh shit, I should have remembered that. I know you're gonna do that, but those would be my Saving Private Ryan. That's another one.
Stop talking. You always do this where you give great answers and then you just keep going and you steal mine. Don't
I'm
just
sorry.
stop.
I know. I know the Spielberg thing. I'm sorry, but there's so many good ones. But I'll stop there. But those are my two picks. My kooky picks for the week.
No, I love that you went super inspired with this, because I'm not going to be that inspired. I have two. If you want just like war, like combat and war, Saving Private Ryan is pretty like undeniable, I would say. I remember I was teaching a lesson on war, and we watched this. I showed this to my class, and just like a brutal, brutal film to show to high school students. But so effective, so well made. Maybe one of Spielberg's best. I mean, Spielberg has a lot of great features, but this one really lives up to the hype. And then the other one, I mean, if you want to look at the impact of war, I think especially with a really strong cultural root and looking at how war changes or affects the youth and the culture of a country, Grave of the Fireflies, of course.
Oh,
I mean,
wow,
you can go listen to our ClapperCast. We did a full episode with Hillary White, a fantastic episode on YouTube, our most listened episode ever. It's high in numbers, I'll be honest. But a very, very heartbreaking film. I'm sure everyone has seen it, but if not, go see Grave of the Fireflies. It's fantastic. But yeah, I mean, I'm shocked you didn't mention Ridley Scott's film. But that's okay. That's the move we move. With that, let's go to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't talked about on the podcast. I will go really quick. I have 2 new releases. I watched Lynn Ramsey's Die My Love, Jennifer Lawrence and Robert Pattinson.
Oh, wow.
Definitely emotional, definitely about this family who has a child and then postpartum depression. But for me, I would say this film didn't necessarily fully connect just because it goes so fantastical into like the genuine psychosis of its characters while also never allowing itself to be this big artistic expression. It keeps trying to make itself grounded while also being fantastical in these displays of emotion. And for me, that conflict was present. I saw at AFI Fest earlier this year, Kristen Stewart's The Chronology of Water, which looks at trauma, but it allows itself to be very, very artistic in the expression. And I think that creates like a genuine masterpiece. I would say this was definitely held back for me. And then last night, I saw Park Chan-wook's No Other Choice, his newest film. His first foray really into comedy here, about a guy who gets laid off of his job. His family is broke. They're running out of money. They have to sell the house. They have to get rid of their dogs. And he wants to apply for this job position, but he knows there's people more qualified for him. So he finds those people who are more qualified, and he decides to go around and just kill them all so then he will get the job. It's funny in its best moments, especially due to the use of music. It is hysterical. It's just one of those films that's like, what is it, 139 minutes? And it does not need to be 139 minutes. It could be 100 minutes, get to the point, be really funny, in and out. That's the goal. It draws itself out so much at times, to where it's quite frustrating. And there's quite a few films this year, I'll say, that's a running narrative I'm finding is, I guess you could really look at modern cinema, but this year especially, quite a few films that just like, take 20 minutes off and you have a masterpiece. But you just have to fill it with fluff. So unfortunate. Jack, what have you seen recently?
Oh, mine might be even shorter than you. I tell you what, I have been started watching. I watched the first 2 episodes of Welcome to Derry, the It prequel TV show. It's interesting what they're building though. The first episode like has a bit of a twist at the end. It's quite fun, but we're not really getting anywhere with it yet. They're 2 very fluff episodes, but I've been finding it quite interesting nevertheless. And then the other one I think I'm 5 episodes into Alien Earth, and everyone's now telling me like you need to back off now. It's not very good. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't know, I'm finding it okay, but it's not what I wanted, it's not what I like, and therefore it's going to be a tough watch, don't get me wrong. But other than that, I haven't really seen much. I don't know if I mentioned if I've watched The Mangler. Obviously, I watched Bound for an Uncut Gems Patreon episode. Go listen to that. Talking about the Wachowskis. 2 weeks on the trot, so I can't complain. I'm currently watching the 2004 Salem's Lot adaptation with Rob Lowe. That's all I'll say on that. I watched a Return of the Living Dead 35mm scan. I would watch that if anyone wants to watch like a zombie movie. Like, it's crazy, it's silly, but it very much is like a 1970s or 1980s adaptation of Night of the Living Dead. I quite like the tonal shift in it. That's quite fun. What else have we got here? And I'm halfway through. No, actually, that's not true. I've been watching it at work. I'm 25 minutes into Christopher Landon's Drop, and so far nothing's happened in it, so I can't say that I'm not enjoying it. But at the moment, nothing's happened in it, and it's very much like, okay. That being said, there's one film I've missed because I haven't put it on my list. On Halloween night with my mum and dad, I rewatched Alien Romulus, and you know what? I really liked it. I liked it the first time I watched it in the cinema. It was really good, atmospheric and wonderful. But I watched it with my mum and dad, and my mum was just squirming and screaming watching it. My dad was like, "Can we not? Why are we watching this? It's Halloween! It's Halloween! It's this, or we're going to watch something absolutely insipid." And I liked it. I thought it was really fun. I probably wouldn't have anything other than I said about it being positive than the positives I first saw when I saw it. But it's fun. There's a lot of like, what's going to happen here, and the Prometheus and Alien Covenant stuff is just they shit on my boy there, and I don't like that. But Noah Hawley is ultimately proper shit on Ridley Scott with the Alien Earth film, or the TV show. So that I don't want to say anymore because I'm going to get frustrated. But I think that's it. I don't think I've seen. No, that's it. I've been boring. I'm sorry. People want to see all these crazy movies I'm watching. I'm just, I'm sorry, everyone. But that's all I've seen. I'm starting slow. Sorry.
To be fair, Apocalypse Now week is a pretty heavy week already to watch, so I
Yeah.
think it's excused for sure.
Oh, thank you for that out. I appreciate it. Oh, I've been reading as well. Oh my god, I forgot to tell you, I've been reading the Art of the Speed Racer book.
Oh, wow.
It does what I wanted it to do. I'm just starting to read the screenplay in it. It's included. I'm going to send it over to you when I get time.
Yes, please do. Please do. So with that, I think that's going to do it for today's episode on Apocalypse Now. Thank you so much for joining us, Jack. Where can we find your words on the internet?
Not that you'd want to listen to me or read anything I've got to say after this long-winded episode, but thank you very much for anyone who's taken on anything on board. It's just I love talking about movies with Carson. It's infectious. You can find my writing on Letterboxd and Clapper. I've just started to document my Hooptober series, which is like 2 months out, so I'm sorry about that, everyone. I've got a lot to go on there, some crazy stuff, some 35mm scans, some open mats, some director's cuts, some work prints, and then just some other crazy stuff. So I've started easy, and I'm going to definitely get into it. Some Toby Hooper stuff's going on there as well. And then you can find my stuff on Clapper, yeah. But and you can listen to me on this podcast and Uncut Gems when I've got time, and Anatomy of Adaptation with Nick's stuff. But thank you very much for having me on Cast. I know that I come on here and I just talk, but you've always been really lovely with me. And you always, Carson never at the end of episode I was like, Carson, if I'm talking, just like tell me shut, just be quiet. But Carson's got so much good grace and love in his heart. So thank you very much for having me on, Carson. I always love spending Sunday nights with you as well. And to watch Apocalypse Now, it's such a uplifting, honest, heartwarming venture into the absolute crevices of generosity and love in the hearts of man, which is no reflection whatsoever into the dark, seedy nature to what we've all got inside of us. I've really enjoyed this, so thank you very much for having me on board. It's genuinely a pleasure.
Oh no, the pleasure's all mine. And if you want to hear more of Jack also on this podcast, you can stick around for more of our, check out what we already have posted. We just did our Speed Racer review, but also this month on Patreon, we are continuing our Coppola series with a review for Tucker, a very underrated Coppola film, not a lot of people talk about, but one that feels, at least on the outside, I've not seen it yet, we'll talk about it next week, very crucial to his career. I also will say I have a couple of plugs, and I realize I have my Criterion order next to me, and it weirdly works for plugs. First off, Frankenstein, Anatomy of an Adaptation. Myself, Nick, and Hillary talk about the new movie and talk about the book. Definitely go check that out. We'd actually do also Brana's version and the original Wales version. So really great conversation. But then going to my Criterion collection, I would just say if you are curious about the Patreon, there's a lot of good stuff on there. We did our Todd Browning double feature.
Yes.
We did episodes of our David Lynch series. Blue Velvet is not on the Patreon, but we did Lost Highway on the Patreon. Did Portrait of a Lady on Fire. We did John Waters double feature. So there's so much good stuff. When I plug the Patreon, it's not just whatever the new release is that month, but an entire catalog of like 3 years at this point of Patreon episodes every single month. Really fun stuff on there. Jack, like even going back to our District 9 conversation,
yes.
Which literally was just an hour and a half at the end of shitting on Neil Blomkamp. Like, cannot recommend it enough.
We're not invited to his house anymore, are we? No.
Well, we'll see if he subscribes to the Patreon. That's how we know if we get the Christmas invitation or not. But Yeah, a lot of fun stuff. So go check out the Patreon. And again, next week we'll be on there to talk about Tucker and continue this Coppola series as we get closer and closer to Megalopolis. So with that, you can find me my words on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Obviously, words at Buttered Popcorn on Clapper. I just posted on Clapper a review from AFI Fest for Ghost Elephants, the new Werner Herzog documentary, which is fantastic. Spoiler alert, we will be talking about Grizzly Man here in about a month on this podcast. So if you are a big fan of Herzog, that is also out there. So a lot of happening here at ClapperCast and a lot of fun stuff. So thank you everyone who joins me on the call, and also you at home listening and tuning in and watching the show. So with that, thank you so much for listening and watching. Goodbye.